Hi, I'm Rebecca from conquerbooks.com, and today I'm giving my very first bookshelf tour. I've always wanted to do a bookshelf tour, so I'm pretty excited to finally have some time to get around to giving you a good look at what I have in my bookshelves. And my bookshelves are a lot less cluttered than they used to be. I used to really subscribe to the belief that every book was sacred, and any book that came my way, whether I bought it, it was a gift, I found it on the ground, I had to keep it just in case I wanted to read it. Now I try to be more minimalistic in my thinking. I keep books if I really like them. I keep books if they have some meaning to me, and if I see myself reading them again someday. I went through my bookshelves a couple of years ago following the Marie Kondo method, the KonMari method for decluttering, and I really found that I had a lot of books on my shelves that I didn't want to read, and having them there made me feel guilty for not wanting to read that classic or not falling in love with that book that everybody else seemed to just go berserk over. And so I really took a good look at my shelves, which were overflowing and didn't look pretty and was full of stuff that I didn't necessarily want, much less need around. And I weeded a lot out. I sold some, I donated some, I gave some away. And now I feel like I use my personal library more because I can find the books that I want, and because everything here is a sure winner. If I walk to my bookshelves, I don't have a problem picking out some favorite book to read because everything here I've read before and I want to keep reading it. This obviously isn't the philosophy that every book reader will have. I also am insanely jealous of people who have floor to ceiling, wall to wall, beautiful bold bookshelves with the newest books and some, great old classics. But each house is different, each person is different, and each reader is different. And for this time in my life, this is what's working for me. I also find that I'm more inspired to use my own public library more because the books that I have on my shelves are things that are for me on a regular basis. But my public library has many of the new books coming out that I'm not sure if I'm going to be into or not, and don't want to commit to spending the money before I have some idea of if it's something that is going to really be a part of my regular reading list. I'm going to go shelf by shelf through my fiction books. They're all alphabetized, of course. That is the very best way for arranging your fiction books. And you'll find that there's a whole diverse array of books. It's not just science fiction and fantasy books, even though that's the main genres that I'm interested in. I think every reader is so diverse in the things that they want to read, and one genre can't fulfill you completely. So you'll find, classics, you'll find graphic novels here, old crummy chapter books from when I was in grade school, wonderful things that Nicole's gifted to me over the years, books that I got for $1, books that I spent $50 on. So it's a pretty wide variety, so I'm excited to dig in.
And we're off to the races with the National Book Award finalist from 1999 by Laurie Hales Anderson called Speak. And okay, I tried to go fast. I can't sustain that for 125 more books. Anyways, Speak was a huge influence when I was a teenager. This copy of The Handmaid's Tale was actually a gift from Nicole. Nicole went to see Margaret Atwood a couple of years ago at a book festival, and she got this signed copy for me. This beat-up copy of The Clan of the Cave Bear was actually sent to me while I lived in Africa by a former high school advisor, and I was a little weirded out by the cover because clearly it's a very old, strange book, but I absolutely loved it. I went on to read a few more books in the series, but to me, they don't compare to the first novel. We have quite a few older books in our library. They're mostly things that my husband and I have picked up at estate sales or garage sales throughout the years, and they're just interesting things to look through. I have the first two books from the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. I don't keep a lot of YA on my shelves these days, but these were the copies I had when I was a teenager, and they're just such fun, interesting books that I'd love to share them with my own kids when they're older. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte is one of my favorite books, my most favorite books ever. It is such beautiful writing. It is such a wonderfully suspenseful tale, and it's a really great book to just sit down and read on a rainy day. This is a signed copy of The Choice We Make by Karma Brown. She was an author that I was able to hear speak at my local Barnes & Noble, and it was one of the first authors I had met in person, and she really inspired me in thinking about my own writing journey as something that is a possibility, not just a dream. Nicole gave me Hyperbole and a Half, and if you have not read this, do not be scared off by the cover. This is one of the funniest books I've ever read, and it talks about some of the real-life funny things that have happened to the author, Allie Broche. I first read The Good Earth in middle school. It has been a book that I return to again and again, and it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized that, well, like most authors, Perles Book has written other books, and then I got a copy of Pavilion of Women, and I liked it just as much. Highly recommend. It's called Play Days. It's an old primer from the 1930s, and I'm not sure why it's here. This is the first book in a series by R.R. Campbell, who's actually a Wisconsin author and on YouTube as well. I took a class in college called American Autobiography, and this was one of the books that we read. The class as a whole had a huge impression on me. This book, The Night of the Gun, is a memoir, and I know you're not really supposed to have them on your fiction bookshelves, but they just seem to fit better with all of the narrative fiction stories than they did on my nonfiction bookshelves. This is a gift from Nicole as well. It's a French copy of La Peste. I bought this 1913 edition of O Pioneer by Willa Cather up in what us Wisconsinites call up north. Nicole and I reviewed this collection of short stories by Ted Chiang, two of which of the stories were just nominated for Hugos this year, 2020. I actually haven't read this. I bought it for $1 at my local library's book sale. I have a feeling I'll probably crack it open during the self-isolation period. These two chapbooks are by a poet who lives in my city, and I especially like Stick Figure with Skirt. I read Jurassic Park for the first time recently, probably within the last 2 years, and whoa, was it a ride. The beginning of the book was actually pretty engaging and pretty fast-paced, pretty exciting. Then towards the end of the book, you kind of got the sense that maybe Michael Crichton didn't know very much about dinosaurs. There were some weird inconsistencies, and I have a feeling they put a lot more research into the movies than he did with the book. This is another one of my favorites, and not just because it shares my name. Daphne du Maurier is a genius. It is such an amazing book, and I know the cover, it looks awful, and it looks like some kind of weird romance, and nothing about it would make you pick it up. But the cover says it all. The unsurpassed modern masterpiece of romantic suspense. Seriously, look it up. I read Robinson Crusoe for the first time when Oliver and I were living in southern Africa, and I read it one school break when there was no one around. We really lived in a very rural area. We were about 17 kilometers from the nearest paved road, and I found myself identifying with it a bit too much. So if you're at home, self-isolating, I would not recommend you read this during this time period. Okay, so by now, you guys have to know I have a thing for books written in French that I can't really read, but I keep around for some reason. This is a tiny little pocketbook of French songs. It's really a beautiful book. I think it's from 1847, and it's the size of my palm. The marbling is beautiful. The spine is beautiful. I mean, man, they just don't make books like this anymore. Evicted is another nonfiction book that happens to be on my fiction bookshelves just because of the storytelling within it. I am on the board of a book festival here in my region, and Matthew Desmond came to speak at one of our events a couple years ago. Nicole gave this book to me as well. I think she knew I'd be interested in it because the author was born in the Dominican Republic, and I travel to Haiti frequently. This is another book I got at my library book sale and seemed interesting. I'll probably read it soon. Nicole and I actually just reviewed Daughter from the Dark. This is a 2020 new release, and I will link any of the books that we did video reviews of down below. This is another nonfiction book on my fiction bookshelves. I've been traveling to Haiti for over a decade and working with a community there, and nobody writes about Haiti like Paul Farmer. This is my copy of The Sound and the Fury, straight from university classes. I kept it around because I do love the writing in this. Another old book, all about the art of letter writing. Someday My Prince Will Come is one of the most underrated books ever. Of all the books that I've read, I can point to this as probably one of the top 20 books that have shaped my life perspective. It's all about a girl who thinks that she's destined to be a princess. And yes, this is a memoir, so Jeremy Fine thought she was destined to be a princess. You have got to read this. I mean, what else can I say? You've just got to. This is my only Diana Gabaldon book. I would love to own the entire Outlander series, and I plan to at some point, but I haven't really decided on which edition or just found the right opportunity to make the purchase. However, I do like the Lord John books. Our 351 Sons was written by a couple who lives in my community who does a lot of nonprofit work. Memoirs of a Geisha is another one of my favorite books. I am just amazed by the historical and the cultural context that's built in this story in a way that makes everything feel alive rather than bogged down by facts. It's a wonderful example of how narrative can just sweep you off your feet and carry you away to a new time and place. Henry Gold was a survivor from the Holocaust. He recently passed away, but he came to my high school to speak. I think you'll notice by now I don't have a ton of young adult books on my shelves, but I really do like this John Green book. I reviewed Green Valley recently in a video, and I initially targeted the book because Louis Greenberg is from South Africa. It's a science fiction novel about two communities with different philosophies on technology. When I was living in Eswatini, Nicole sent me this very copy of The Magicians, and it was like a lifeline. It was something new to read. It was exactly up my alley, and this is actually the little postcard that she sent along with it. We both read the rest of the series, but I think that the first one in the series is definitely my favorite. This is an anthology from one of my English classes in college. It's a selection of English literature from the Middle Ages up until the 18th century. Kelly Harms is another Wisconsin author, and I got to see her speak last year. She signed this copy for me, and it's all about a woman who is just overwhelmed by motherhood, and as a mother, I really connected with it while I read it. I took a university class on literature from the Civil War, and this was my favorite book that we covered. Nicole and I reviewed The Vanished Birds recently. I'll link to that video as well. This is another book that I've had since I was a teenager, and it taught me a lot about mental health. You can't see the title because I don't have the dust jacket, but this is actually Insomnia by Stephen King, and I can't believe this is the only Stephen King novel I own. I'm a big fan of his, but I think I get most of his books from the library. However, during this COVID-19 pandemic, I wish I had a copy of The Stand to keep me company. Barbara and her family set out to only consume food they either grow or get locally for 1 year. I also really enjoyed the Poisonwood Bible. It connects with me on so many different levels. I've only read it once, but I'm looking forward to reading it again. I was a big Shopaholic fan in high school. I've read quite a few of the books in the Shopaholic series, but nothing compares to the very first one. I also have a copy of Remember Me by Sophie Kinsella, and I've read a few of the Sophie Kinsella books. They're nice to keep around because they're lighthearted, they're funny, and they can take your mind off things. Speaking of lighthearted and funny, I also have a copy of Crazy Rich Asians. I have to admit, I do like the movie a little bit more, but the writing is pretty funny too. This is another memoir from my American autobiography class in college. Nicole and I reviewed The Tomorrow Factory, which is a collection of short science fiction stories, and man, are there some dark ones in here. This is a copy of Game of Thrones from 1996. Nicole doesn't think it's a true first edition, but it seems to be some sort of book club edition. I'd also really like to own this series as well. I have them on my Kindle, but I'm just waiting to figure out what edition I want to purchase. If you liked Game of Thrones, you'll probably like A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms as well. This takes place about 100 or so years before the Game of Thrones, and it follows the story of a knight. And if you liked a Game of Thrones, you may or may not like Fire and Blood. This book really threw me off at first because it's actually a history of Westeros, and it's written by a maester. Nicole and I did a video on this, and we talked more in depth about it.
And finally, a book about France in English.
Oh my gosh, and who doesn't like the #1 Ladies Detective Agency? This is like one of the best series ever. The Woman Who Walked in Sunshine is a signed copy. I got into Twilight late, but once I read the first one, I sped through the series, and I really enjoyed it. I like the first book a lot more than I like the other books in the series, though, so I only own the first one. Nicole gave me this copy of The Bone Clocks, which was written by David Mitchell, who also wrote Cloud Atlas, which you're probably pretty familiar with. But to be honest, I kind of like the Slade House better, which is kind of a side story set in the same world. You've heard me mention the American autobiography class I took in college that I still have a few books from. Well, David McGlynn was the professor who taught that class, and this is his memoir. He also wrote a book on fatherhood, which is a collection of very funny essays. The Night Circus by Aaron Morgenstern, another gift from Nicole. Thank you, Nicole. Another old book, and I'm not sure if it's me or my husband who insists we keep this around, but yes, it's an old book in French. I'm guessing you haven't heard of The Tale of Genenji or Lady Murasaki, but really everyone should know about her. She was a Japanese novelist who lived at court 1,000 years ago, and it's thought that The Tale of Genenji is actually the first novel ever written in human history. Lane Moriarty's books are just fire. Like, you just dive into the first page and it just pulls you along, and there's so many secrets and twists and turns. Man, they are some good reads. I read The Husband's Secret first, but then when I saw a copy of Truly, Madly, Guiltily, I snatched it up. Nicole and I also reviewed Gideon the Ninth, which came out last year. I love The Time Traveler's Wife. Enough said. Flannery O'Connor is an amazing author. If you haven't read her stuff yet and you're interested in American literature, you've got to. You can't see the title, but this is A School History of England from 1901, and I have no idea why we have it. Wonder is another story that I'm excited to share with my kids when they get older. And of course, The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This was another very influential book in my teenage years. This is a new collection of short stories by the horror novelist Sarah Reed called Out of Water. Amy Wright-Hart signed this copy of The Coincidence of Coconut Cake, and she signed, "To Rebecca, eat more cake!" Exclamation mark. Rhonda Rizzo's another local author in my community. This is the only Anne Rice book that I own, and I bought it kind of just because it was $1. And I read it, and I'm not sure about it. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it, and I'm not sure if I'm going to go out and try and read more of her books. This is an art copy of Deal with the Devil. I will be posting a review on this next month. This is a sneak peek of The Chosen Ones by Veronica Roth, who wrote Divergent, and the book is actually out now. I enjoyed parts of the sneak peek. I'm not sure if I'm going to go out and seek to read the whole book. I might get it through my library just to test it out. And of course, the illustrated Harry Potter, which has incredible artwork. However, as much as I like them and enjoy them, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that every Harry Potter lover collects them. I wrote a blog post on the subject, which I'll link down below. And then the other Harry Potter novels, I'm still waiting for the illustrated editions to come out for these. Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. You know, to be honest, I didn't really connect with this, and I wasn't sure if it was the storytelling or because it's just meant to be on stage. So it'll hang around for a while. Maybe I'll have the opportunity to see the show sometime. We'll see. And The Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling. This was a different, but good book. I love essays by David Sedaris, so it was a no-brainer to keep this around. This is a gothic story about a bookseller and a reclusive writer. Gunner Craig Court is an online comic that I've been following for years, so when they had a sale, I snatched up the first copy. Nicole and I reviewed the speculative fiction novel by Charles Soule recently. Mouse was also in my American autobiography class. Yes, I know, lots of them still around, but that's because they were such incredible reads. And so yes, this is again a true story. It's a memoir. Even though it's on my fiction shelves, it's real. I'm an art history buff, so I enjoy having this Gertrude Stein book around. I just put up a review of The Glass Magician a few weeks ago. A copy of The Help. I read this aloud in the car to my husband over the course of an entire year. This is a signed copy of a book by the former governor of Wisconsin, whose wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. This is an old university textbook as well. It's the Norton Shakespeare, which has all of Shakespeare's writing collected into one book. I do really enjoy reading Shakespeare. I don't do it very often, but I enjoy coming back to it and reading little snippets of it. Also, the introduction by Stephen Greenblatt is amazing. I have no idea who Stephen Greenblatt is, but his introduction to this anthology is like one of the best pieces of writing I've ever read. Amy Tana is a novelist that I come back to again and again, not just for the great storytelling, but because she writes about mothers and daughters. And I used to really identify with the daughters, but now having kids, I'm finding more and more pieces of the mother story that resonate with me. This was a gift from Nicole, the goldfinch. The Hobbit is also one of my all-time favorite books. I read it for the first time in 6th grade, and I've read it close to probably every year since then. I love the writing, I love the characters, I love the fairy tale storytelling. There's just so much in here that to me makes up the perfect book. And as for Lord of the Rings, I'm so on the trilogy. I like parts of it. It gets a bit long. It's frustrating that there's so few female characters. And what's frustrating most about the copies I have is that they're the movie editions. It's not like they're bad to look at. Okay, another old book in a foreign language, but this one's not in French. I think it's in German. This one's from 1893. It's called The Story of the Nations. It was obviously part of some sort of set because this one just focuses on South Africa. I haven't read in it extensively, so I don't know how much of the narrative is still something that we'd accept today. In the house Nicole and I grew up in, there was always a Calvin and Hobbes comic book on the dining room table. I'm incredibly happy that I have this amazing bound collection. And Grandma, I know last video I said I got rid of that gardening book that you gave me. Well, this is for you. Thank you so much for gifting this to me. I bought the 3 collections of Saga last year after Christmas with my leftover Christmas money. I like a lot of books, but when I read Saga, I get absolutely obsessed. I'd give a blanket recommendation, however, they're extremely graphic in pretty much every way that it's possible to be graphic. So definitely read up on them before you crack one of the novels open. Paper Girls is by the same writer from Saga, Brian K. Vaughan, and this is about literally paper girls. And I reviewed this for our channel before. I've read The Glass Castle many times. This is another memoir. As you can see, I love science fiction, I love all kinds of fiction, and I love reading autobiographies and memoirs for some reason. The author of The Glass Castle, Jeanette Walls, also wrote this, kind of a biography of her grandmother, but she had to fill in a lot of holes, so it's technically fiction. Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, some incredible writing, especially about death and the beauty of nature. Return on Investment is by a writer I went to school with. The Salvaging of Civilization, The Probable Future of Mankind by H.G. Wells. And these days I'm kind of wondering what it's about. This is another timely book, probably the most timely book, Wanderers by Chuck Wendig. Nicole and I did a video on this last year when it came out, and I was just obsessed with it. I'm going to read it again this summer. The book starts on June 3rd, so I'm probably going to start reading it that day. Edith Wharton, another beautiful novelist. My daughters were in the NICU, and these 2 books were by the grandmother of one of their nurses. I hope these covers take you back. I read these books again and again and again when I was a kid, and I'm actually reading Little House in the Big Woods aloud to my kids right now. It's our first non-picture book, and so far I think they're getting into it. Our national government from 1907? We'll just skip that. I attended a pre-college program in New York City when I was 16 years old, and one of the things we did was to take a tour of Warner Books. They gave us stacks of books. We could take whatever we wanted, and it was my first time being in a publishing house, and it had a big impact on me. Okay, just a couple more things. This is my kids' bookshelf. We do a ton of reading. And this is my workbook shelf. You can see my Daily Greatness Planner. I've been using them for years and really like them. And then we have our nonfiction books. I try to keep books around that we actually use. And like you can see with this book of wildlife in Southern Africa, while Oliver and I were living in Southern Africa, we kept a list of every single animal we could identify. I was an art history and English double major, so down here are all of my art history books.
That's my fiction book tour. Thank you for following along. This has been something that I wanted to do for a long time, mostly to have the record of it so that I can look back on it in 15 years and see how my bookshelves changed, or for my kids to see what I was reading when they were little toddlers. But I hope you enjoyed it too. And if you have any of the same books or notice any similarities with your personal library, let me know in the comments. I think that'd be fun to talk more about. I think that in this time when we're confronted with so many big things related to the pandemic, books and talking about books and book culture is a way for us to step aside from that for a few moments and just engage in something familiar and something that we really love. Thank you for staying home, essential workers. Thank you for supporting our communities in this time. That's my bookshelf tour. Bye.